Well, as I said, Matt, sort of welcome to the show, as they say, and thanks very much for doing this. You are a bit of a Five Canary sort of celebrity that's going on in the fancy at the minute yourself. Um, you seem to be you'll be opening shops and kissing babies and doing that all sort of thing. And we just wanted to get you onto this so that you sort of remember us when you move on and start mixing it with the stars, because I think
Yeah, well, yeah, no, thanks, Paul. It's only a matter of time, I think, before Kanye and the Kardashians call me, and we bring Five Canaries to Hollywood.
I believe there's a fragrance in the pipeline.
I don't really want to talk about eau de shed, because every time I come into the house, the missus says to me, "You stink of birds," and I'm not quite sure what that smell is, but the way she says it, it's not a favourable thing.
Yeah, I think Peter Stringfellow's wife used to say that to him as well, the same sort of thing, that he smells of birds, So I think that's probably the same celebrity line you're going on, But yeah, it's great to get you on, Matt. Obviously we've been friends for a long time and we've known each other a long time, and it's good that people sort of would like to put a bit of info behind the celebrity that is Matt Elge, and everyone knows probably obviously from YouTube, and obviously you've been on the fancy for a long time, but people don't seem to realize that you first got your boards at the age of 13, which wasn't yesterday. But
no, it wasn't.
But a little bit about that, how did Matt L sort of kick off because at the moment a lot of people are in the fancy, are joining in the fancy when they're in their 30s, 40s, family rare, and there's not a huge cohort of people like I only have boards, I've had boards that was probably about 15 or 16, 14, 15. So how did it kick off for you at 13 years of age that you got into boards?
It's I mean I'll try and give you a short version of the story, Paul. I always had an interest in birds. My Dutch grandmother was from farming stock, so livestock in general was something I was always interested in. I spent quite a lot of my childhood on various different farms and around, so the kind of livestock thing was very much there. I think it was my 5th or 6th Christmas, she bought me the Hamlin's Guide to British Birds, and I used to annoy/embarrass the family at an early age by we spent most of certainly most of my childhood in holidaying in the lakes in Scotland, and I'd spend a lot of time trying to identify either by the call or by a visual look at the birds, as I say, much to my family's frustration, but that was really where it started for me. And my grandfather, mum and dad were from the sort of just outside of Watford, Kings Langley originally. They moved up north in the mid-60s for my dad's work, and my granddad kept budgies, and had flights of budgies and exhibited budgies for many years. And I sort of, developed an interest in the native bird, and then local pet shop, visited there every Saturday, sort of worked unpaid as a sort of Saturday boy there, and they had canaries, and the guy who ran the shop was a guy called Brian Wild, who had rollers and red factors, as they were known at the time. And these things just really, caught my fancy. We always had a pet canary in the house, and I just decided that I really wanted to sort of get into to keeping birds. So like many, it started off, it's a bit like the Canary Room today, to be honest, a menagerie. So unfortunately, in the summer of '86, I lost my father. So I was 13 years of age. It would be his birthday today, so it was quite poignant to talk about him today. We and his workmates built me an aviary. He talked about it. He talked about building it. he wasn't able to. He was diagnosed, I think, in the April time with inoperable cancer, and he died at the end of July. So we talked for some time about, we had a pond in the back garden, we were getting mandarin ducks and, you know, a whole variety of different things. And sadly, he passed before we were able to do that. But his workmates came round and built a shed and built me 2 flights, and I had a collection of birds, budgies, canaries, zebra finches, cockatiels, all of which are sort of, you know, had varying degrees of success with. But the canaries really were the thing. I'd remembered, you know, from the pet shop, I'd seen Gloucesters, and was fascinated by the sort of the fringe of the Gloucester and everything else. And so that was it. And then before I knew it, I had a double breeder in my bedroom with with a pair of red factors and a pair of rollers, which, you know, are really good at waking you up early in the morning, particularly in the thing. And that was the beginning of it. And sort of just sort of 4 or 5 years, you know, I had a mixed collection of birds and enjoyed them. Not, you know, nothing showing wise, didn't do any exhibiting and anything else like that, just enjoyed them.
Yeah. And then obviously you kept them for many a year. And then, like most people of that age that kick off, you know, start a family, you start chasing a few women, you start finding a bit of college, a bit of school, you go a bit of clubbing, and then people at it's the same. It happened the most. It probably happens to probably a majority of fanciers over the years, that sort of life takes over, and you got outboards for probably several years, probably your mid-late 20s, sort of, and obviously that was life. Life does that to people, you know. And then later on, when you come back into boards, like, you obviously still found the love of canaries, and you found the love of, you always had, from when you were in the pet shop, you had that love of boards in general, but canaries. You sort of first originally come under a very sort of prominent border fancier, Pat Fenlon.
Yep.
And how did, like, probably at the time, like, most border men kept pipes anyway. Like, probably more then than probably now. It's the same now. Now it's more out of necessity. I think then it was just probably a natural progression that people went into it. So, how, like, were you friends? Did you all of a sudden just stumble across them, or did you?
No, well, there is actually a man on this call who has to take a degree of responsibility, in fact, sole responsibility for me finding the fife, and that is Mr. Terry Kelly. I'd started out when I decided to go back into birds. I just had we just had my eldest daughter then, so she's 22 this year, and I'd sort of, you know, consumed everything I could, and you know, I'm going back 20 odd years now, and there wasn't a great deal online. There wasn't a great deal of information, and what there was you know, some of the books were very old and very dated, and I consumed all of them and still do, and you know, there's still really pertinent things in there. But there was this young gentleman from a small town called well, just outside Huddersfield. Now, I actually went to university in Huddersfield. A young gentleman from that West Yorkshire peninsula called Mr. Terry Kelly, who wrote a book called The Fife Canary, and produced a series of DVDs and videos on the Fife Canary, and I that was that, and remains to this day, and I'll embarrass Terry because he's on the call, my Bible. And there was lots of advice in there about, you know, going to a specialist show, meeting fanciers at a specialist show, and that's what I did. And so I went to the Northwest Fife. It was held at the time in before it was in Rainford, it was in Skelmersdale, in a school in Skelmersdale. And anybody who remembers it, and I know it was one of Terry's shows, anyone who remembers it will know that you had to go through about 77 roundabouts to get there. But it was I was introduced to Pat at that show, and I said to him, I'm interested in getting some birds, and would you have anything available at the end of the year? And Pat was like, yeah, sure. And to be honest, a number of my practices today still, are based on what I read in Terry's book and the subsequent conversations I've had with Terry, and looking at Terry's videos, and the conversations that I had with Pat. And he was a phenomenal inspiration to me. I had his birds, and I think there's a real obligation for us as fanciers, established fanciers in the hobby, to help out where we can. And I've tried to do that where I've been able to, and Pat certainly did it with me, to the point that I sort of bought birds from him, but didn't have a shed, so he kept them until I built my room and my cages and everything else. And I started off that first year with 6 pairs, 5 or 6 pairs. I think I bred 44. I've never had a ratio like it since, I have to say.
But you're right. Like, I think sometimes we forget the fact that the people who influence us in the fancy, and Terry has, I would stand by that, Terry has influenced so many people to join the fancy. Because I remember when I first started out in Fifes, it was probably 98, 99 on the CBS scene. And I went to a show in Newry, and I met a fella called Alex Steele and Sam Barkley. And they were like, we have a specialist show up in Northern Ireland. Would you like to come up? And at that stage, like it's a good old drive from my house in Rathope. I was in Dublin at the time, in Ballymun, or Finglas. Was it Finglas? Probably Finglas. And we took that, like, it was like 4 hours up to Ballymoney. It was a good drive. And I drove up, and sure enough, Terry Kelly was judging, and his wife Pam were at the show, and Terry was judging the Northern Ireland 5. That was probably in 2001, 2002, probably. I think Terry probably judged. You might correct me on that, but it was early 2000s when Terry was judging the Northern Ireland 5. And I bought his book, and the same thing. There was no illustration before then, there was no, like, it took you 25 minutes to dial in your internet connection, and you were hoping that nobody rang to speak to your mother halfway through Coronation Street because you'd be cut off. So Terry's book was something you could sit and read. So you're dead right. So initially, your stock obviously started from Pat Fenlon, and but you'd stock from Pat, but your practicing and husbandry was from Terry's book and all that Terry had offered. And then, like, prior to 2010, you obviously were an experienced fancier up on from that time to 2010, because you joined the panel in 2010. But prior to that, when obviously we all know Jared Spencer is undoubtedly the best fancier that the hobby has ever seen. In the last since the millennium. Like, no, Jared has always been there or thereabouts, or led the way for a lot of people. But how did you become, like, you're obviously quite friendly with Jared even today, but you obviously made the move to Jared's boards like prior to 2010.
No, absolutely, Paul. What it was, certainly the lads who've been in the fancy for some time will remember the partnership of Stanway and Warren, and Harry Stanway and Paul Warren. And Harry sadly no longer with us, and Paul has just returned to the fancy. And Pat had a 3-parts dark buff cock off Stanway and Warren. And like many fancies, took it for a year, used it as the outcross, and then moved it on, and he moved it on to me. And I'd sort of had a conversation with Pat, and he just won the Scottish National, which was a fair achievement around that time, because it was a fantastic show. It was a show he was very very sort of, part of the shows in his calendar. He took his boards up there, but he took his fifes up there as well. And it was fair to say, really, Pat was a border man, but he had a good stud of fifes, and he was looking to improve that stud of fifes. And so he'd identified Gerald as a place and a person to go and basically buy a trio off. And I think we we learn something every day, don't we? The moment that you stop thinking you've got something to learn is the moment you need to pack in. And I'd sort of thought, well, if he thinks that these birds will blend well with his stud, then I'll I'll follow that route. And as everyone knows, who knows Gerald, he's fantastic at answering the phone. He's really receptive to communication.
Email, very much online.
He's responsive to every time that you make contact with him. And so I think I must have written him about 5 or 6 letters. I'd never met him. I didn't know who he was. And I struck up quite a good relationship with his mother, because she was the only one, God love her, who ever answered the phone in the house. And for those of you who've ever phoned the house and spoken to his mum, she has a fabulous way of shouting him from the house to the bird room. In fact, you can hear it in Liverpool, and he lives 100 miles away. So I kind of I went round to see him, I think, as a in my second year. I'd just done my second year as a novice, and I'd made all the mistakes that you make. First year I'd say I bred 44, something like that, birds, and I was going to be a clear specialist. I didn't like those green birds. I didn't like those variegated birds, so I got rid of all of them. And learned my first harsh lesson that this is a type canary, not a coloured canary. So, but I did quite well, and I went over to Cheltenham. I was very clear. I wanted a variegated buff cock, and I wanted this, and I wanted that. And at the time, he had a very strong line of dark birds, but didn't particularly have many clears. And I came away, I think, with a variegated buff cock, a self-green yellow hen, and a self-green buff hen. And then pretty much every year thereafter, I think that next year, the third year novice was my first best novice, which was a blend of the 2 studs. And then pretty much every year after and subsequently, I've dipped back in to that line. And pick birds up. So it was really, it was Pat's sort of, not introduction. It was Pat's. This will work well for me. That really was the foundation.
And has like, obviously we know you're a member of Northwest. You're that sort of direction. Is that your only club you've always been a member of? You were never sort of traveling with work or with family. You never moved away from that, or do you always Northwest?
No, so I worked across the UK. I've always lived in the Northwest. I'm now in a sort of the family home has always been in a little place called Formby, which is just on the northwest coast, which is it's a beautiful part of the world. So, we've got a beach and a red squirrel reserve and all kinds of things. So it is a really, really, I'm very, very lucky to be where I am. But I worked across the UK. I started my career in media and publishing. So I worked for a company called Trinity Mirror, who owns newspapers across the whole of the UK, which was fantastic because they owned the Huddersfield Examiner. And so that was quite close to Gerald's house. So I could go and do a meeting in Huddersfield and then pop through to see him. On the way down. So, but show-wise, I've always been a member of the Northwest. There is, the north of England, and again, largely from sort of Terry's book and Terry's involvement in there. The north of England has been a show which has been very, very close to my heart. I think every time I've had the opportunity to show there, because I've had a couple of years, sort of 2016, 2015, where I didn't have brilliant breeding seasons for one reason or another, but every time I've been able to, I've gone and showed there. So yeah, Northwest sort of is the base here.
Yeah. And then obviously you spent plenty of years as a novice, and you were very, very successful novice. Like, if you look through the archives at the time, some of the top partnerships in the fancy today were, like, in a lot of ways, you were in the cauldron with some of the most successful novice fanciers who have led to be some of the most successful partnerships and single individuals as champion today. So there is some novices that come through in the last 10 years that didn't have the pot of champions that have come out of your pot. So although when you look at the result sheets and you look at that, you wouldn't have, you'd admit yourself, you wouldn't say you were a dominant novice.
No.
But you were in a pool of, on a time when some of the most successful partnerships today you were a novice with them. You know, you like,
no, I mean, one of the things you're absolutely right, mate. And you know, if I think about sort of the Rob Roy partnership, you know, a number of different fanciers were all novices at the same time, and it was brilliant. And that's always been the attraction to the fight for me, has always been that competition, and the fact that, you know, those sort of the novice, you know, cutting your teeth in the novice years. I mean, I showed as a novice at Northumberland and Durham, which isn't around anymore. I think Cleveland kind of came from the ashes of that. I showed as a novice from Shropshire and Solop, and won. I showed at the North of England as a novice, North Wales as a novice, and yeah, you know, I held my own. I won a number of specials. I had 2 best novices as a novice. But yeah, I competed, and really, I think that's all, you know, all I ever wanted to do. But yeah, it was a time. It was a very competitive time, and there were, you know, if I think back, I think to the North of England, I won best clear. I won the clear buff cock class, and I won the clear yellow cock class,
which was like 150 boards.
Yeah, and there was you know, as a novice, they were strong classes, you know, sort of 20, 25 plus in each class, which doesn't sound a great deal now when you think about the champion classes having 60 clears and you know, whatever, but actually in the novice ranks it was good. But
you're right. But it's like when they speak, like it's like at a time when, like, Gary McBeat, like, no, I don't know Gary Bate all that well. I don't know him a lot. I like, we get on very well. We click, like, but like Gary McBeat is the only fancier, including Gerard, including anyone else, who has won the Midlands back to back. He won as a novice, back to back as a novice. And sometimes people look at that and go, but the time when Gary McBeat was winning as best novice, like, to win a back to back to show like Midlands, like, same with you, like, to win a novice back then, it's not saying it's less than it is today, but back then, like, it was quite an achievement to win a best novice, like, you know, because like when Tom Campbell was a novice, like, it was back in the time when, like, some of the most experienced fanciers today were novices.
Yeah.
And
I think that's it. The thing was, there wasn't one dominant exhibitor in the novice section. You know, we had the sort of the latter parts of my novice days. We had the Kendall partnership there, A&S as they were now. I just like to call them the Sue Kendall stud, to be fair, because we all know that it's Sue who does all of the work and the selection and everything else.
And Kevin paints the fences.
And Kev, yeah, although he needs to step his game up on the fences by all looks at it. But no, you're right, Paul. You know, it was a very competitive environment, and that was great. Because you genuinely didn't know, and to, you know, the fights today, still, you genuinely walk into a show and you don't necessarily know who's going to be on the top table. I can see the big fella sat next to me. He looks like he's half asleep, Andy. I'm boring you. But you know, the big man there, stunning set of birds. My only frustration is I never managed to get a trio off him. But you know, we'll sort that out, I'm sure, at some stage.
Oh, he's tight. Oh, they're tight, Scots. Oh, they're tight. You know them Scots. But in the same context, we spoke to loads of fanciers, and same, they would always associate footballers with golf. They always say that all footballers play golf. I've noticed over interviewing people, probably over since we started doing a journal and a magazine for like the federation and now for the council, and I've sort of interviewed loads of people, try and get articles and fill in. And I would always say that footballers are always associated with golf. But what sort of come to the fore lately is that boardmen seem to be associated with fishing, and I believe you still haven't. It's probably not a used set of rods, but I believe somewhere in the garage there is a set of rods belonging to Matt
There,
Ellis.
there is indeed a set of rods that belong to Matt Ells. Yeah. No, we've got the Leeds Liverpool Canal, and we've got a number of pits around here, and I am a keen, if not frequent, angler, and I think you know the whole kind of thing of fish in general. If the garden was big enough, A, it'd have more flights in it, and B, it'd have a pond.
Yeah. You'd be the only man fishing for koi carp.
Yeah.
I mean,
but as a younger lad, you know, I think the first I've always had a sort of entrepreneurial spirit, whether and that was out of necessity. You know, my dad, as I say, I lost my dad when I was 13, and he didn't have life insurance, and so my mum had left work to look after the kids, and had a house to sort of pay for. So rather than being a burden, I went out and grafted. So I had a morning paper round, an evening paper round, a free paper round. I washed cars on a Sunday. And then I sort of invested some of that money in some aquariums. So when there weren't bird cages in the bedroom, there was aquariums with Mozambique mouth brooders, and you know, live bearers, guppies, and swordtails, and you know, I sold the surplus to me mates, and tried to make a bob or two here and there wherever I could. So I am a keen fisherman. There are rods, and there is nothing I like. There's nothing I like more than sitting on the bank with a couple of beers, and you know, seeing what happens.
Yeah. Now you obviously joined the panel in 2010, which is probably just short of 11 years ago, because you would have joined in April, probably. And you would be regarded across the whole fancy, not just in the UK, Ireland, but there's probably not a show you haven't judged. Yeah, and same in the last number of years, we've seen you judge ones in Malta and in Italy and places like that. Like, is it a part of the hobby that naturally comes to you, or is it something that you sort of always aspire to become a judge, or was it just something that you just decide to take up? And do you enjoy it? Like, do you enjoy judging? Obviously, it's different now because you're more media focused and you're very much out. But you've been judging for 7 years before the Canary Room, like.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think the judging side of things, I think I think as I probably talk a lot about obligation, and I don't mean that in a negative way.
Yeah.
But I think as fanciers, we have an obligation to put back as much as we can into the hobby, because we take, you know, I certainly derive so much pleasure from it, although it can be frustrating at times, which in itself is a perverse kind of pleasure. And I find the sort of judging, first and foremost, a great honor. It's something that I take sort of quite serious. I think as, you know, if an exhibitor has taken the time and the effort to bench a bird, then as a judge, you have an obligation to be serious in that. Now, you know me, Paul, as well as anybody on this call, and I don't take myself particularly serious in any area of life. But the judging side of things, I think, is a real honor, and I think I feel very fortunate in that I have been selected on a number of occasions for a number of different shows, and you know, and the trips to Malta are fantastic. They're an enjoyable experience. The trip to Bologna was an enjoyable experience. You know, I've loved judging every show, and generally speaking, when the invitations, I sort of said, no, we didn't have a show season last year, but I'd sort of said last year I was going to try and sort of pull my judging commitments back, because I wanted to be able to exhibit as well. And you know, I'd committed to Graham to judge the Midlands, and obviously I'd committed to Gary to judge London this year. I'm never judging North Wales again because I've done it about 5 times in the last 5 years, it feels. So I seem
You
to
become
be
a
the last.
resident. You become a
Yeah,
resident.
I am, and I quite like showing there as well. So,
Because
but
in
yeah,
fairness, the rumor went around that because of Brexit, you were trying to get citizenship of Wales, and that's why you were
Well,
there. But that was
it's
the
more.
rumor. That was the
Yeah,
rumor. That was the rumor.
it's yeah. Well, it's that, or it's that, or with the Scots, we're declaring Liverpool as a united republic.
Yeah.
So,
But obviously, there's plenty of newbies sort of entering the hobby, and there's like lads that really. It's a different sort of time of people entering the hobby now. Like people are entering, as before people entered, and it was small little board sheds, and now the new breed of fanciers that's coming into the hobby, it's a much bigger setup, much better setup, more professional. They're more into husbandry and things like that. That's happening in boardrooms. And just tonight, like I would have engaged with Lee Westerman, since he joined the hobby. Like he would always have messaged me. He messaged me on Facebook, and he's always engaged. And like for a new lad like Lee who's just come into the hobby, and there's plenty of others who've come in, and you as a panel judge, what grates you when a board is presented in front of you? Like what's the one that what upsets you?
The thing that upsets me most is a dirty cage. And you would still be surprised at the number of dirty cages that get benched. And I am, as I've become sort of
Old and
older
grumpy.
and a bit more cantankerous, I tolerate them less and less and less. And I think for 2 reasons really. I think one, I think it's tardy, but I think it's really disrespectful to fellow fanciers. Because I think if we take our birds to shows, and there's a stress that goes in there. And I think if you don't present the bird in a nice cage, I mean, I've had cages at times that, as you've moved them or you've picked them up, you're itching. And you just think, whatever bird is going to be near this is going home with Northern Might. And I think that's a real. I just think it's poor. And I think for fanciers, whether they're newbies into the hobby or experienced fanciers in the hobby, that the cage floor, the perches, and we know, you can go to a show, particularly we go and support the lads up in Scotland, or you go down south and you're benching the birds early on a Saturday, or you're putting the birds in the cages early on a Saturday morning. And there are things that are gonna, you'll get crap on the perches and stuff like that, and that's kind of, that happens. You accept that, but some of the cages, I almost don't want to judge, and I do now find. So if it won't be anyone on this call, I'm sure I'll write dirty cage on the labels, and I'll make a point of it, because I think we have a duty to our fellow fancier to make sure that our birds are fit and healthy and are in a really good, clean environment when we bench them. So that's it. That's my first and deepest bugbear, Paul. And then the other one is, and I had this experience in Italy, which and those of you, I know, Kane, I don't know if you've judged in Italy. Terry, I know you will have done on numerous occasions. But Italy is a really interesting experience because you are essentially watched as you judge. So exhibitors are all around you as you judge, and they'll bring birds to and from, and they'll put things back. And one of the other things with Italy is the majority of the shows, or certainly my experience of them over there, is that the clubs provide the show cages. So the fanciers bring their birds in. We've all seen the plastic travel cases. They bring the birds in those. They put them into the sort of cages, and they go there, and those cages are steel. So by the time you've lifted 400 of them, I was like Popeye, sort of, lifted it and moved it around. But one of the sort of funny things. I judged a particular class, and birds go back to the bench, and then someone will always pull you as to why that bird has got ahead of that bird, and this couple of guys sort of, turn the cages round so I couldn't see the cage labels, and they were like, which is the better bird? And I went, well, as they stand now, it's that one. And you went, yeah, but you put this one first. And I went, and let me show you why. And I picked the cage up, and the bird shot to the top of the wires, grabbed hold of them, and then raced like a linnet for the next 5 minutes.
Yeah, it was gone.
And it was completely and utterly gone. And I think for fanciers, young and old, and experienced and inexperienced, that sort of, steadiness, I believe steadiness is very much bred into the birds, but actually we still have a responsibility to train them. And we've got a bit of a challenge, haven't we? Because we used to, certainly when I started out, we'd use the CBSs as a training show.
Trainers, yeah.
And there's very few CBSs. There's only one round here now, and there was 5 or 6 when I started. But that's the other thing. Dirty cage is absolutely number one bugbear, but also that, spend the time. Spend the time in training them, help them find the drinkers, all of those.
But as you just sort of touched there, it's something that is probably sort of close to me sort of over the years, because you just touched on it there. Do you feel that the rise of the specialist club is obviously seen to the demise of the CBS club? The CBS club scene, as they'd say, is the increase. Do you think there's room for a sort of reversal, that because obviously there's a need now for bigger venues, there's a need now for better facilities at venues, there's obviously need for more parking, there's more, we're all increasing the show sizes. Like, I'm sure Graham in the Midlands, if he increases any more, like the venue will be they will outgrow the venue with the popularity of the Fife. Like Graham, the Midlands is viewed as one of the best shows and the biggest show. But you imagine if Graham, I know he doesn't want it. I know there's probably, you can see him changing colour as he's looking at the screen. But I think if he arrives in on the Thursday before the show and there's 17 or 1800 boards enter, he's hoping there's a good wind and four of those don't turn up. Because, like, is there going to come a time when we're going to get a bigger venue that like the North Wales venue is a fantastic venue. It would easily hold 2,000 or 3,000 fights. Handy, it's like a national venue. That we move back into shared venues with specialist society. Like, no, that we go to Midlands, and the Midlands will have the Midlands Fight Club, and it will be run in conjunction with the Midlands New Colour or Lizard or the old and rare. Are we going to go back to? Not saying we have an elitism of specialist club, but that we try and maybe engage with a section of the fancy that we grew from, like.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the show thing is really interesting, isn't it? Because the reality of bird keeping is that there is a core, and it's a decreasing core of individuals who do all of the graft. And that's one of the, so, did the rise of the specialist shows cause the demise of the CBSs? I don't know. Did the guys who were specialists just put their effort in running the specialist shows rather than the CBSs? I was secretary for Liverpool Old Swan CBS for a number of years, as well as holding a position in the Northwest Fife Fancy. And, I was one person trying to do a lot of stuff. And I think one of the things that as a hobby we fall victim to is we are overly reliant on too few people. What I think is interesting in the hobby now is the number of different varieties that fanciers keep. And whilst I consider myself a specialist Fife breeder, anyone who's seen the Canary Room will know that there is a small menagerie of canary and native species in there, which seems to grow every time there's a new show on. And so I think, Paul, to answer that, I mean, I think we as a fraternity, as the Fife fraternity, if we can, leverage the strength of our hobby to provide a platform, say, for, the old and rare and the Norwich, and whether that's a CCBA zonal show, and we can share costs and do the work once and use it loads of times. I'd be a massive advocate of that. I know. I mean, Adam and I had the pleasure of judging Swords 2019, and
I won it.
Yeah. You wouldn't have done if we'd known it was yours.
Oh, that's harsh. Oh, that's harsh. But you're right.
It was blue as well, if I remember.
Yeah, it was a blackboard. Yeah, it was a blackboard.
Yeah, it was a blackbird.
Blackboard.
But no, I think if you one of the things that struck me about Swords, and it's similar to an extent about the show at Stafford, is that actually as someone who is interested in all aspects of aviculture, to go around Swords, to see 200 Irish Fancy, to go and see some really nice quality borders, to see some really nice natives, but to see the foreign and the kind of all of those sections. For me, I was like a kid in a candy store, to be fair, and if I think we have to keep progress. I think if there is an opportunity for us to use the strength of the Fife to encourage other varieties, to give them the opportunity to co-share a show hall, I think it drives interest for the Fife lads. I think it drives interest for the hobby as a whole.
Yeah, I think, like, obviously the Fife Canary Council kicked off this year, and we're sort of sitting at we're just approaching 200 members. We gained 4 members this week, so we're really within kicking distance of hitting 200 members. And I think that the chair is on here, Kane is on here. I think we have a responsibility as a council, I feel, and it's something that I do feel strongly about, is that we have a responsibility, obviously, to care for our birds and breed birds, and that's our main sort of goal as a council. But I also feel that we need to put in place things that we breed the next generation of Graham Peppers and Chris Wildings and the people who have run our shows the past 20 years, because obviously we're getting in new fanciers. We're getting people, new fanciers. Like I think last year I probably sent out 25 to 30 welcome to the hobby packs from the house here. So I think we definitely need to encourage the breeding of the next generation of show secretaries, the next generation of club treasurers, the next generation of stewards, the next generation. And I'm not saying there's not, I don't have a clear program for it, but we definitely have a sort of pathway to get those people in, because when, like, I won't be here forever, Graham Pepper won't be here forever, other people won't be here forever, like, no. So I think we have a responsibility to breed that on, but taking on that, we sort of go off on a tangent sometimes, like, no, you can sort of get wandered off, like, no. Obviously in the last couple of years you've been exhibiting more than you've judged. An odd year you've judged a lot, and you've barely scraped in and judged your 3 or 4 shows, but you seem, I'd say, in the last 4 or 5 years to found a bit of a love again. Would you say a bit of a love for exhibiting? Would you say, or maybe it was just?
Yeah, I think the love kind of, the love for exhibiting never really left. I think I have I've those of you who know me will know that I've had more house moves than a hermit crab probably over the last 10 years.
We actually thought you were in witness protection. We thought we like that. I'm just putting it out there so people don't think I'm talking behind your back.
I was going to say, if you'd met my ex-wife, you'd know why.
You wish you were.
So I've had a number of moves for the last 10 years, and those moves have not always been coinciding with, you know, a good
Thing in
time
his
to
shed.
move. Yeah, and a good time to move the Canaries. There's been, you know, more than one occasion where the move has happened quite quickly, and perhaps less planned.
You didn't know the day before.
Yeah, yeah, that may have happened.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, I had sort of, you know, I turned champion. I think probably 2007, and did okay when I moved up, and did, you know, competed, and you have a different level of what success looks like when you move up into the champion game. And, you know, for me it was about getting in the cards, and it was winning
Still is.
some color.
Still is. Still is.
Yeah,
Still
yeah,
is. Still
absolutely.
is. Yeah, still is.
And still having, you know, and sort of competing for a colour special, if I could. And so I had a couple of years where the, you know, sort of family things, it would sound really crass to say, got in the way. Things outside of the hobby were more important than the hobby, and that meant that the birds were, I wasn't having particularly good breeding seasons. I think I had 2 seasons, one where I bred 13 birds and another one where I bred 19 birds, and that really,
That set you back. That does set you
yeah,
back.
it did.
In development,
It did,
it set you back. Yeah, development.
and I think, you know, we've seen the Fife move so quickly in terms of its development as a bird, that, you know, you lose those couple of seasons, and you're playing catch up. So I had a few years where I had a couple of really bad seasons, and I couldn't. In fact, the first year I did the Canary Room, the first series in 2016, I had a really bad season, which was slightly ironic because, you know, I'd taken to the airwaves as this self-appointed Canary
Expert.
person, yeah, and I couldn't breed a bloody bird. so that
But
is.
you never told us that. You never told us that. I had spoken to lads saying, I think I've seen that bird about 27 times. He must have bred twins or something. But like, it was, you were just rotating the same bird.
Yeah,
you know?
no, it was the same one, mate. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was it. But I've always liked the exhibition side of the hobby. I've always enjoyed that. I like the shows. I like the laughs that we have the night before the shows. I like the ribbon and the Mickey taking, of which I seem to be the butt of most of on the day.
No, we'll take that back now. We'll take it back now. In the last couple of years now, there's been a lot of people throwing bouquets at Mad Elf. There's been like, there's days when I've looked on the internet and I think I was looking at the Chelsea Flower Show. Do you know what I mean? And I have to sort of check the Google to see if there's anyone called Eld or Spencer. Is they the same people? You're like, no. And your fashion has led the way.
I think, Paul, you know, I've been sort of known, you know, for a number of things. I think the clearly the devilishly good looks
doesn't go away. It's a cross you have to bear.
I think that's right, and I think, you know, the sort of the check shirts. I've worn one tonight, of course. The check shirts were were actually are actually a reflection of my wardrobe. It wasn't until I watched some of the Canary Room back, I was thinking, Christ, I've got a lot of check shirts, and they've just become part and parcel of.
They're cults now.
I think so. Well, as I edge ever closer to 10,000 subscribers, I am actually going to give a check shirt away on 10,000 subscribers.
And like I know I give you a bit of a ribbon. I know I've given you a bit of a ribbon, like no one, but like, is it something that just happened? Like, because like, is it just? It was subconsciously you just got a vet. Like you get vouchers for M&S for Christmas?
No, not at all. It was just, I think as I hit sort of middle age, I think, you know, and I'm those of you who know me will know I'm a fuller figured man, and I kind of, in my own mentality, think perhaps the check, you know, takes away the fact that I could be a Western Samoan front row. And it kind of sort of puts that, you know, it deflects, it deflects the attention away.
Because in fairness, I was going to put my fifes in check shorts to try to add a bit more roundness. Do you know what I mean? I have the same sort of thing, you know.
I absolutely would, but yeah, the
the
shirts, yeah, unfortunately are part of the wardrobe. So yeah.
So you've sort of moved on, and obviously in the last couple of years, the Canary Room has really taken off. It's heading on. It's sort of heading north. It's coming towards 10,000 subscribers, which is phenomenal. It's phenomenal. Like, no, since day one. I jumped on board at the Canary Room, and I just as it became free, I subscribed and paid, even though it was free. It was like bidding against yourself, you know. I was already the highest bidder, and I decided to bid a bit more. And I was like, yeah, Perch Films has taken your money, but it's now free on YouTube. And I was like, well, that seems fair enough, you know, seems fair. But
it's a win-win.
Yeah, it's like, in fairness, like, it's a brilliant addition to the fancy. I can't thank you enough for doing it, because, like, at the end of the day, I am part of a hobby that I really love, and it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal, right? But there was a couple of people had asked questions, stuff that you probably didn't cover. People that did ask, like, we have one there, like how long is the average that you would store eggs for before putting them back in?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, I've got, so if I take this season as an example, I have probably, I've got 30, I think now, 5 hens, which is more than I've ever had, with the exception of 4 of them. I think they're all unflighted. So I've got 4 flighted and 26 unflighted hens. And as we all know, as fanciers, you don't know how good a hen is until you try it. I've got 3 or 4 hens that are confused as chickens at the moment. So they're laying eggs, but they have absolutely no inclination whatsoever to sit them. Now, the one beauty, as any of the lads who keep a volume of birds will know, of having a huge number of birds, and you know, that's 35 hens. That doesn't include the coloured canaries or the Irish. That gives me an opportunity to move them around. I've got eggs that I've kept in a drawer for 7 days and set them, and they've hatched. I've got eggs that I actually haven't set. I've got a variegated yellow hen that's laid. It laid 2, and then it laid a further 3. And it's just laid another 2. I still haven't set the first 5, and I won't now. They're too long, but around about 7 days, Paul, would be. I've heard a sort of outlier as, you know, 10 days, but I think, given the fluctuation, I mean, mine is quite a modest room, but it looks bigger on camera.
Definitely. People have asked me how big is his room, and I was like, well, it obviously has its own postcode, because it's hectares. I think he measures in hectares. It's mad. Like it's online. I genuinely would think that shed is 30 by 40. Like, it's it.
Yeah. Well, Lee's actually been in the shed, and he'll tell you that it's a 10 by 8.
Like, it's well, in fairness, Lee must be getting his tips from you, because Lee, in his 4 shed, is smaller shed, a small blue one. I think Lee, I know what Lee does, he's a chef, but I think in a former life he worked in IKEA, because he's used every single centimeter of that. I think his shed is probably 8 by 10. It's probably smaller than yours, his first blue one. But if anyone starting the hobby is following Lee on YouTube, or which they should try and subscribe, not only to Canary Room, but also to Lee's channel. He's the master of, I've never seen a shed like it. His first shed, he used every inch of that shed, and it looks very impressive. And you could know he's been to yours, because, like, they both look bigger than they actually are.
It's 8 by 8, my shed.
Which?
The first one's 8 by 8.
But you've probably more in that shed than I have, and my shed is 26 by 12 by 14.
I've got 48 cages in the 8 by 8, and the second one's 8 by 8, but it's 8'4" tall, and there's 72 cages in that. So 120 cages in total at the minute.
Phenomenal. Like, just.
I've only got a small garden. So I've got to try and make as much room as possible.
And in fairness, Lee, you've sort of come into the hobby, and the boardroom is like it's exceptionally impressive. I have to say, the new lads who have entered the hobby in the last 2 to 3 years, there's Alan Duff has come back to the hobby, and there's a couple of lads in the council have just come back to the hobby of the last year or two, and the standard of boardroom that I've seen, it's phenomenal. It's a credit, just not just to you, but to many of the new lads have come back in. Tony Corn, and I think there's Tony Corns, he's from Northwest, I think. He's having a bit of a bumper season. I don't know whether he's on tonight, but he's had a bit of a bumper season, and his room was like our own. It's very impressive. Like when I first started in the hobby, I started in an old coal shed and knocked a hole in the wall with my dad's best wood chisel, moved all the coal into black bags and put it in the garden. And my mom was going crazy, and my dad come home and I'd ruined his best wood chisel into a back of into a concrete shed, and there was an asbestos roof, and like I mean, where the newer rooms with the newer fanciers, and I think a lot of that is down to the availability of information, and that's available all the time. Like Matt's Canary room would have a huge influence on how husbandry and how things are done, because you can actually view what's being done. Someone's not like it's like the old saying: if I tried to explain to you how to drive in words, you'd never be able to drive a car, because you're doing so many things at once. Where the Canary room has really been a credit to Matt, and it's a great addition to the fancy.
I agree. I mean, I wouldn't have had 5-seat one because of Matt. That's when I first started watching Canary room. I was interested in some livestock, but the 5 sort of, through Matt, that's where I went into 5s. And the fancies in my area were Gerald, and Matt put me onto a few, but Gerald's where I got my stock from. But watching Canary room, I started to learn, and there's other people now that are bringing channels out that you can watch bits and bobs on British, and it's good for fancy, where people can learn, because like you said, apart from Terry Kelly, which I've read the book, I've watched the DVDs, apart from that there's nothing else.
I think for me, I mean, it was, Terry's videos and that approach was part of the sort of inspiration. And I was worked in a media and publishing background anyway, and I sort of set the Canary room up. I had it initially, it was done as a partnership, a joint venture, so I had a proper film and edit crew for season 1 and 2. So it was the episodes were filmed, I'd do bits and bobs, and then it was never set out to be a commercial venture. My ambition was that we'd produce something of quality, because I was getting a bit fed up of looking on YouTube at loads of videos that I didn't think were very good, because we'd been spoiled by professional productions like Terry had done, and I thought for the hobby, where is the next generation of fanciers going to come from? Well, they're going to come from a place where they can access information, and that's going to be online. So, Matt's 5 Canary pages has been a website I've had up since 2007, I think 2006, something like that. And the Canary room seemed to be the natural extension of that. And then season 3, and then subsequently season 4, I've essentially taught myself to film and edit. So what you see, a half an hour show, and it kind of makes me laugh at times. People are like, well, can't you do more of them? And I'm thinking, well, to produce a half an hour show, I probably film the cutaway shots that you see over about 5 days. You all know, lads, you're in your room and you've got a bird feeding young, and so you get your phone out to film it, and as soon as you get your phone out, it stops.
Yeah,
Or you run a cockbird in to mate a hen, and then you try and get your phone out to film it, and as soon as you do that, it's done. So actually, to get the cutaway shots.
I totally sort of get that, because people, lads would say to me, obviously I've been producing the magazine, the 5 magazine I've been producing, and lads be going, yeah, I'd be like, it would take probably 200 to 300 hours of work to produce that magazine. Like, and it's like 50 or 60 pages, 50 pages, but it would take me, like, I think the last one before, it took maybe, I think the quickest one I've done one is probably about 230 hours, 240 hours, you know, and I think the same as you, like, it's a half an hour slot, but it's probably taking you, it's taking you nearly all week. Just you couldn't do it in a week. You couldn't do it in a week.
No, I mean the show takes the half an hour episode, for those of you who sort of have an interest. I use a program called Premiere Pro, which is what they edit TV shows on and films on, essentially, and it takes between probably 7 and 9 hours to edit a half an hour show.
Crazy.
And it takes, you know, the pieces are due to camera, you can tell they're not scripted, but it probably takes another 7 or 8 hours to film, because, you know, I will run the camera. I've been out this early evening today filming some of the birds, and, you know, I'll film for 2 or 3 minutes and I might use 3 seconds of it. So I've got to watch through all of that film to find the 3 seconds that I want to use.
Yeah. Now, during your time, obviously, in the Canary Room, one of the big features that we have is going on the road, and it's going around. And you've been to, like, you're down to Freddie Masterson in the Red Pole. You were also to Steve Dominy and Pepper.
Yeah.
And it's a super happy. You were Kendall Stud, you were with Gerard, you were around the place. But Stephen and what's
Bob.
the Pepper? Bob Pepper. Yeah, they've brought it. I've got to have their book. I obviously bought their book. I don't keep Yorkshires. I've no plans, but it's a fabulous book, and they've brought it out in Italian, Israeli. They've brought it, and, like, obviously, you're planning a book. Are we still? Is that something that's I know it's not that you're not busy. I know you're not busy.
Yeah. Well, as Terry will tell you, producing a book is not without its challenges. So I'm self-publishing. So there's 2 things. So first and foremost, without going into huge amounts of detail, I've got to pay. So no one's commissioned me to write this book, so I have to pay for the production and print of it. And obviously, throughout the lockdown, I'm self-employed, so that didn't work particularly well for me. The writing the book, I've wanted to make sure that I get some really good photography, so it's quite sort of pictorially led. I'm doing the photography myself. That's hard to do. Anyone will know who's ever tried to photograph a fife. You can have the best fife in the world. You put a camera on it, and so again, you know, taking a still from a video or a screenshot from a video doesn't have the same print resolution, so you can't do that. You've got to keep going away. So there is a book in the offing. I'd hoped last year to get it out sort of around about the end of November. I got new cages then. I've rewritten it. I've rewritten elements of it probably about 7 or 8 times. I am going to carve out some time. It will be out some stage in 2021. I just don't know when. But I've got a printer now. I've done all the design and layout myself, so I've self-taught myself that as well, using a publishing program. So yeah, there will be a book, and you know, both with the channel and the book, the idea is you'd not, you know, if I was in this hobby to make money, which has been thrown at me as an allegation, I tell people, well, I wouldn't keep the birds I keep, because, you know, the time and energy and effort that you put in, there isn't, it doesn't return it doesn't return commercially in any way, shape, or form.
As a man who has been on the end of that tarnish a few times, I can guarantee you now, there's a lot more pleasurable ways. There's very few more pleasurable ways to waste money. And I can tell you one thing, fifes is where it is, because you know, I can hear every single word you've said, because it's been thrown at me too, you know.
Yeah, well, the thing is, and you know, I don't want to sound like I'm defensive or prickly about it, but it comes from a place of ignorance. The reality is, each episode of the Canary Room, you know, gets I think the Steve Dominy one and Bob Pepper one gets has had 30,000 views. That's been 30,000 views since it was released in April last year, so that's in 12 months. That
About
video,
150, 2 quid less.
yeah, it's probably
That's
about
150.
it's probably about 170.
Yeah, which in fairness, wouldn't buy a
it
cup of tea.
generates.
It wouldn't
No.
buy you a cup. You wouldn't be able to watch it wouldn't be able to watch a 40-minute episode and have 2 cups. That's
No,
for
so
sure.
I
That's for
think
sure.
some people think, you know, you're on YouTube, so you're some kind of millionaire. You're
No.
on YouTube as a millionaire if you've got 1 million subscribers.
Yeah,
The Canary Room with its 10,000 or nearly 10,000
it's not coming, yeah.
is not a retirement plan.
Yeah,
But
yeah, for sure.
I've enjoyed it, Paul, and what you know, I'm looking forward to going to see Terry and his bionic knee. And I've got
Steve Austin. We're going to be calling him from next week. Steve Austin.
He's going to have his tea now. He's had enough.
Yeah.
But you know, and that's been, and I must say this, not just because he's on the call, but Adam has been, you know, both a tremendous support of the show, but also a tremendous support in connecting me with people. So Adam set up the interview with Keith Ferry for me. I'd never met Keith before, and I found that fascinating. And one of the things that I hope from the show is that people, you know, looking at the hobby through different spheres, looking at different things. So, you know, I went to see Keith, I went to see Dave Rands, and obviously Steve and Bob, and that opportunity to spend half a day with those guys and just absorb the information. You know, you see half of it, a third of it on camera, but just to absorb that information. And you know, it's I would say I've probably learned more producing the show in the last 2 years, just because I've had the opportunity to go and absorb information from those guys, and I'm indebted to that. I know it's really, you know, some people aren't very comfortable on camera, but what I've wanted to try and do is to make sure that the knowledge which is in Bob Pepper's head, Steve Dominy's head, Keith Ferry's head, Terry Kelly's head is extracted as much as it can be and preserved.
Because we've lost fanciers over the year, like Roy Fox. I remember I met Roy Fox, and what I learned in 15 minutes with Roy Fox, I probably haven't learned as much in the last 10 years. Like, I mean, like little things that, and I think Pam has saw the Terry there. Terry was in a land of oblivion there, so I think Terry's there. So Terry, I know you're probably going to be heading off. You probably weren't planning to come in, but we, as a group, as collective of lads on here, we'd really like to wish you all the best tomorrow for your operation. I know you're going to be missing for, but you won't be missing for that long. We'll keep in contact.
No. I'll be on crutches for a little while, but I'll recover. I'll
yeah, but we'd like to wish you all the best for your operation tomorrow, and you know, and we're all very appreciative what not only what you've done in the fancy, but as a gent, you're an absolute gent, and me personally, you've always been in contact with me, and you've been a big supporter of mine, and wrote articles and positive thoughts and that. So yeah, like for me, I wish you really all the best tomorrow, and I know you're probably starving at this stage.
Thanks, Paul. And thanks, Matt. Really enjoyed it. See you soon.
Yeah, you take care. Good luck tomorrow, mate.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Okay. Yeah. So, Matt, I'll sort of open up to the floor there. Like, really, I really appreciate you coming on. I know I have you tortured for the last few months about coming on, and we WhatsApp most days and we're chatting crack. But I really appreciate coming on. It's been really, we've sort of found out more the man behind the check shirt than anything else. We see, you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of people don't realize that you are in board since 13 years of age. You know what I mean? Being in witness protection is not easy and keeping board. So, you know, people have a new appreciation for the man behind the check shirt, and I was proud of that sort of team that we put on, you know. So I'll unmute the lads. You can all unmute, lads. You can have a chat there. You can ask Matt walk away. You can work away with Matt. Like.
Look at that. There's no questions. Brilliant. Well done, fellas.
Yeah. I'm sure Graham will definitely have a question. Graham, we haven't done a Zoom meeting ever. That Graham Davis hasn't asked a question. Never. And if he doesn't, his internet must be down. I think that's.
I chat to Matt as well. We were talking about cinnamons this week, one thing and another.
Yeah.
You're talking about these shows where you're seeing all the birds. Now, one of the ones I really enjoy is the one down at South Bucks, which is the All Canary. And I mean, first time I went down there to help. I mean, I've lizards as well, so it enables me to have me blue lizards, me normal lizards, and me fifes. And then you go down there and you steward all day on another section. I usually get lumbered with the Irish, and I can't get my thumb in the top of the cages. And the window that they use for looking at the colours and things like that, that's where I was stewarded. And 180 Norwich. I mean, it's just an amazing sight.
Yeah.
I mean, you're now getting into them a bit yourself. So I think an idea of all Canary type shows, I mean, apart from going to Stafford and then that one down at South Bucks, Wickham Way, I mean, are there any other around the country, that type of show?
I'm not aware of any, Graham, and I know it's a conversation that that I've had with a couple of the lads. I'm just looking at what Mr. Kendall's changed his name to.
Larkin's done that.
Has he? Yeah, I think I'm not aware of any, Graham, but I think as we look at the we look at the hobby and we look at the lads on this call, I know Lee has got some natives. I know Andy's partner's got some Belgians. I know I've got new colours. Right, Adam's got a menagerie of birds. Kane and Luke have got with the dad. They've got, I think, still Gloucesters on and Borders on as well. Gary, I don't know whether you got the poles in the end, but I know you were thinking about getting some red poles as well. So, Daz, I know you've got the Irish on. So, the lads I know, and I know Paul, is your lad still got his new colours.
Yeah, and then I have a couple of pairs of red-faced parrot finches, and I also have the yellow agate mosaics. I got locked down 3 pairs, and they're all breeding away. And
so I think, Graham, whilst we all sort of we sit under the umbrella of fifes, many of us have got different varieties. I'm not aware of any clubs that have that kind of on a scale.
Where you came in with your CBSs.
Yeah.
Every single bird, didn't you?
Yeah.
Every variety on those.
And I think that the thing is, for all of us, we can I went to when I went to see Steve and Bob, and I was looking particularly at their Yorkies. You can't help but appreciate well, certainly I can't, a really good quality bird, whether it's in a species you want to keep or not. Part of my challenge when I go around the various different things in the canary rooms, and earlier, sort of later this month, probably early May now, I'm going to go and see Peter Harrison, the zebra guy. Now, Pete Harrison lives half an hour away from me. Now, I'm going to have to do everything within me powers possible not to come away from Pete Harrison's house with a couple of pairs of zebbies. Because and it was the same when it was the same when I went to Steve and Bob's. Keith, I'd already ordered Norwich before I went to see Keith Ferry, to be fair, and Dave Rands was fantastic, and he'd said to me, if you want some Gloucesters, I'll sort you some out. And I was like that. No. Say no. But yeah, I think that's the challenge, and certainly with the show, part of the challenge for me is to the menagerie of birds in there is to sort of try and keep it interesting. So you can see, if it was just about fifes, I don't know, would it be as entertaining without the red poles driving me mad and various different things like that.
Yeah, it's a good mix. I think that's the thing.
Yeah. absolutely.
Well, if that's all,
LD.
Matt, we'll sort of wrap it up if you want.
Larkin, can I ask one?
Yeah,
Just
go
go back
ahead,
onto the fives. Obviously, you've been in fives for a long time now, and by many other than me, you're probably considered to be one of the better judges. What's your what would you say is the biggest change in the five since you very started to the birds that you see now on the show bench?
I think one of the things that I've particularly noticed, there's probably two things, to be fair. One is the overall quality has improved dramatically. And so there are now really good quality birds wherever you judge in both champion and novice sections. So the quality overall for me has raised demonstrably. And I think, in the past, anyone who has judged will know, the hardest thing to do is judge a small class of really bad birds, because you're kind of thinking, well, which one do I put first? And because they're all of a poor standard. Thankfully, that happens less and less now. So I think that the quality overall has improved. I think the other thing which has been noticeable over the last few years is how, as a collective, people have strived to bring the size of the bird down, but have retained the type on the bird. And that's the real challenge. I think, going back 5, 6, 7 years, we had two very different styles of fife. And to an extent, you're always going to have different styles because people interpret the model in a different way. But I think we had very big bodied birds that kind of held their shape, but they were big. And then we had small birds that were close to type, but when they pulled tight, they look like, siskins. And I think what we've got now is smaller birds that are retaining their type. And for me, long may that continue. To get, I think we all know, to get type on a small bird is to get it on a bigger bird. You're working with a bigger canvas. It's easier to do. It's not easy to do, but it's easier to do. To get that type on a smaller bird, you've got to shorten everything down, and that can be a real challenge. But I think overall quality and size have been the biggest improvements for me over the last sort of 5 or 7 years as a judge.
When you're setting out to judge a class of, say, 60 birds, what's your first prerogative for cutting them down as fast as you can? Because you've all got a time limit.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, Graham, I judged a class of 45 variegated yellow cocks at Southern England. And it was when Southern England had the separate room that you judged in. So it was quite dark in the show hall. And then they came into quite a light room, and the birds just freaked out. And generally, what I'll do before I judge anything is I'll look at the birds on the staging. Now, anyone who knows me, and particularly I'm looking at Kane Thomas here, because Kane has a tendency of doing this just to annoy me. I'm sure anyone will tell you that there is a classification I despise judging, and that's the clear buff cock class. And invariably, whenever I judge, I end up judging the clear buff cock class. And the reason I don't like it is because the quality of clear buff cocks is few and far between in my mind. And they also have a tendency to be seemingly quite fit when it comes to the show. So they can look bloody brilliant on the staging, but as you put them up on the judging bench, they pull tight and whistle like mad, and they're impossible to judge. So one of the things that I do is I'll go along the staging to start with. I'll have a look at the birds on the staging to start with, and then I'll bring as many as I can up to start with. And then I'll work through. So one of the things I'm a particular fan of doing is having a sort of, a turn cage on the end of the judging trestle. so that the end bird, the bird that's in first, if you like, isn't on the end of the staging. Because I've found with experience over the years that actually being on the end of the staging can spook a bird, and it doesn't perform as well. So the first thing I'm looking for is a bird that I'm going to dismiss, and then I'll work through them sort of quite methodically, and I'll look at birds that you need to run class, for example. So those are the birds that go straight back. And then it's just a question of whittling them down. So really what I like to try and do is have, if I've got a class of 60 to judge, I'll think about it in thirds. So I'll bring the first 20 up and I'll take them down to 10. And then I'll bring the next 10 and then I'll take them down to 10 again. And I'll bring the next 10 and I'll take them down to 10. So ultimately at the end of the day, I'm left with what I think is the best 10 birds. Before I mark the 7, I will always give myself, anyone who's seen me judge will think, God, he goes to the toilet an awful lot of times when he's judging classes. Normally what I'm doing when I do that is just going back and having a look on the staging to see if there's anything that's, gone back on the staging and really settled, and I might pull it back and give it a second chance. But it is quite a methodical thing, Graham. And you're right that there is a pressure of time, but I try and give the time to the classification, and I'm certainly not the quickest judge on the circuit, but I like to try and give the birds as much time as possible. And I always think if you've got 20 birds up there and then you whittle them down, it can be quite difficult. I remember 2019 Big Andy's show. I was up there and I think I was judging the green yellow hen class, and I don't know how many there was in the show. There might have been about 30. I whittled it down to 20, and honestly I must have spent, Andy was ripping me something chronic. I must have spent about 45 minutes trying to pick the best 10 and then the best 7, and you could have reordered them. And that for me is, one of the challenges of a judge, which is why more often than not I'll hang around afterwards, because you could have come 10th in a class of 60 and you've got no idea that your bird was better than 50 other birds there because it's just got a little cross on it. And so I'll always try and stay around, but it can be, anyone who's judged shows will know that birds change and they change quite a lot. But I am quite methodical in my approach to doing it.
On judging, what's your thoughts about doing the novice classes first?
It's an interesting one, Graham, to be honest, because I think I've seen it done a couple of times. I've seen it done the smallest classes first. So whether they're champion and novice, and I quite like that, to be honest, because you can, where you've got 1s and 2s in a class, you can move through those quite quickly. And then that leaves you more time to spend on the biggest classes. I think I'm a great believer in putting the birds back on the staging after they've been judged.
Yeah.
And so I don't necessarily like it when birds are sort of clustered on a table in the side of a hall. And I know it makes it more difficult for the show team, but I think to give the birds a better chance, I think, you've put them in a strange environment. You've moved them to one place. You've taken them away from where they've settled, and then you move them back. So yeah. I prefer it when it's done on class size rather than let's do all the novices first and then let's do all the champions. That's my personal preference.
Yeah, I was thinking along the lines when, as you're saying, like towards the end there, you're looking at your watch and time's going on and you haven't even started the novices. Yeah. And they do feel like they get whipped through a bit quick,
Yeah,
and because of time. Now, yeah. I think last one we had at Stafford, that they did the novices first.
Yeah, I think the you've got to give, as a judge, you have a responsibility to give every bird the opportunity to show itself, and I think that is your responsibility as a judge. And you've got to make sure that the show is open at a reasonable time and everything else. So you are mindful of time. So I do like the, irregardless of whether it's champion or novice, it's the smallest classes get done first. And that means if you've got a class of 25 novice birds, you give that the same amount of time as if it's 25 champion birds.
Yeah.
Come on, McBeath, you've got to have a question. It can't be about West Ham. Gary McBeath's on mute. I've lived for this moment forever.
I've asked him to unmute,
Have you? He's trying to work it out now.
Yeah.
Come on,
Right down
Gal.
the corner.
He's waiting for his granddaughter to sort it out for him.
Pam Kelly will be there in 10 minutes.
I was going to say, let's all cherish this moment.
Silence is golden.
Up there, look. Up in that corner.
I want to know why you keep bigging Adam up when it's all the rest of the family, not just them.
Yeah, no, I do.
I'm joking.
Right, yeah. I think we all know. I mean, what was funny about last year is Adam actually didn't go in the shed until we filmed the Canary room. That was the first time he'd been in the shed. And Kev has changed all the pairings round for this year. So if the Kendall stud do anything this year, it's because Kev's been putting his favourite birds to other birds in the shed.
He's smiling.
Oh, you're in trouble now. You're in trouble now. I think Gary has found the button.
Oh, yes, he's off mute.
Oh, you're in trouble now. I'm just getting the popcorn, Gary, out of the microwave. Hold on a minute.
Matt, when I first joined on this evening, Paul was talking about dead in shell. Do you bob your eggs in water the night before they're due to hatch?
I used to, Gary. I don't anymore. And the reason I don't anymore isn't because I don't think it's a good idea. I, as many of you will know, I had COVID earlier this year, and I've always had quite a shaky hand. Undiagnosed, but I've always had quite a shaky hand, and that's made it significantly worse. So I struggle picking up the eggs. Now I have broken one this year because I can't physically hold them, which I find quite difficult. So I've certainly with some of the birds this year. So I've got native bullies down on eggs at the moment. I haven't touched their eggs. I haven't gone anywhere near them.
Is that the same principle as just putting a bath on? Because I've traditionally have always put a bath on the hen the 2 days before and the day before the hatch. I always put the bath and they always readily take a bath. Is that the same principle?
I think it probably is. I found this year I've changed my baths. So I had all wire baths, but I've been using like a pigeon salt in the water to help with the the preening and the feathers and stuff. And since I've changed the baths to all plastic baths, the birds seem very unkeen to get in them. So I have been spraying them a little bit. But I used to do it, Gary, and I thought it was, it was something I would do because in my own mind it helped sort of soften things up and out. But I think dead in shell, there's a variety of different things, isn't there? I have a little humidity meter in the room that checks the humidity levels in there. So I do keep an eye on that. But I've had dead in shell, and I think if a chick chips out and it's got black spot and the rest of the clutch don't chip out, then you can probably attribute black spot to the rest of the clutch. One's just managed to chip out. So yeah.
What's the ideal level of humidity?
It's an interesting one, Paul. I keep mine between I like to keep mine between 50 and 60. I think if it drops below 45, it starts to get too dry. Yeah. So at the moment, it's not too bad because it's, my shed's insulated and it's not I've seen on the humidity meter it's dropped to 45, but it's running about 50, 60 at the moment. So it isn't too bad.
Yeah, like Paul, I spray all my hens a day or two before, rather than give them a complete soaking. But I think that helps.
Yeah, I find they readily take a bath, no real issue. A couple of days before, and I would probably continue giving baths maybe on a weekly basis, even when they're rearing. I don't.
Oh yeah.
I'm inclined not to stop. You know, like the same. Someone asked me last week about cleaning out cages. I still clean my cages out on a weekly basis. I clean them out when they're sitting, when they're rearing. They just seem to be used to the fact that the hoover goes into the cage, the scraper goes in, and then I hoover the cage, and the hen will happily just sit on the nest when she's set. And I continue to clear it out on a weekly basis, and I don't have any real problems. Lads would say I don't clear it out from when I set the egg. I only clear it out the first day I hatches. Other lads would say they would clear it out only once between there and weaning. But I suppose if your birds are climbing, used to getting a bath, or used to getting bobbled, or used to getting a hoover, I think they just adapt to the system, and it doesn't really bother them. I don't think it does that like that, you know.
Yeah, I do the same every Saturday or Sunday, depending if I'm fishing or not. And you know, everything gets cleaned out, and the one lot of chicks that I weaned yesterday, at the weekend, the baths went on, and even the chicks went in the bath. I mean, they didn't quite know what they were up to, but the parents were going in, so they followed them in, and they come out looking a bit like drowned rats. But the time comes now that this weekend, those chicks will have the bath put on. And I mean, they're only just weaned this week, so they'll have the bath, and they'll be in there. There's never any problem with them going in.
Taking a bath, yeah.
I think one of the biggest issues with humidity is what you find is that it's the retention of the humidity in the shed, and what you normally find is obviously a reduction in humidity where your room gets dry, no matter what construction your room is or where it is in whether it's, you know, next to your house or garden. The tendency is, because it's going to normally be when the weather picks up or you have the hot days, is to open your windows, and that's probably the biggest mistake. And what we found is that you keep the windows shut and you keep the environment as humid as you can. And if you open your windows, your shed will become as dry as the air is outside, and it's almost impossible then to keep it up. And it almost goes against the grain because it's so hot. It can get really, really warm, and you have to then put some fans in, and it feels like it's a little bit overkill. We rarely have dead in shell. The flip side of that, we've got quite not a damp shed, but our shed retains humidity quite well. Keep the windows shut, open up in the morning, let the air in, close them up, put a fan on, monitor humidity levels all day, and then as the evening started to cool, open it up, let the fresh air back in, and kind of push the air through and ready for the next day. Consequently, come autumn, when it starts getting damp, we have a dehumidifier to take the moisture out of the air, because you want your shedding it come, you know, what is after the mold to be dry, because that's when you're going to start picking up mold. That's when you're going to start, the birds will pick up, you know, a wheeze or a cough or something. So what a lot of people always contact me about dead in shell, and I always say to them, close your windows. And I know that completely goes against the grain for a lot of people, because they want the windows open, you want fresh air in there. Open them in the morning, open them as late as possible if it's a cool evening, but in the day, keep them shut. And if you do, and you can keep your humidity at around about 60%, you won't have any dead in shell. You might have, as Matt just highlighted, if you've got black spot, or, you know, you will have birds die in the shell. But when you're having, when you've got your sheds too dry, because you'll have nest after nest after nest. You won't just have ones and twos. It'll be complete nests, complete days that you've set together. None of them will hatch. And for me, that's the worst thing in the world, because when you think you've got a dark egg after 7 days, come 14 and they don't come out, they're all dead in shell. There's nothing worse than that, really. Clear eggs, you can deal with clear eggs, but when they're dead in shell, it's something that you've done, and that for me is always a frustration. But that's the only tip I can really give you to that may help. The bath thing's a good one though. A couple of days before, that's also a good one.
Right, lads, it's nearly 9:45. I'd like again to thank people coming on. Fair play. It's really been engaged. Zoom room sessions. They've really been engaged. We've sort of an announcement sort of next week. We're nearly over the line with one of the biggest fanciers in the hobby has ever seen. Never mind just the it's not Fifes, but we're nearly over the line there. So hopefully we can tie down a date for him to come on. I was speaking to him today, and he's very encouraged. And he was in the show directory. He gave us a tip for the show directory. He's not a Fife fancier, but he gave us a tip for the show directory. So we hope to get him on. And then obviously when Terry comes back from his operation, he's going to be on. And then we have a couple more lined up. We have a couple of lads from Scotland, and there's a lad that's on here. We're going to get on. So thanks very much for coming on, Matt. Superstar as usual, mate.
Pleasure.
Superstar as usual, mate. And I love the shirt. It must be a new one. I've not seen that one before. So I like that shirt. I have to say I'm impressed. So yeah, good luck, lads. We're going to get it be on the YouTube channel for any club members who, if you want to give them a shout that it's on. It's on the YouTube channel probably in the next 20 minutes, half an hour. And that'd be great. Listen, lads, thanks very much for coming on. Brilliant. Thanks
Cheers, everyone.
Super.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
See you, everyone.
Bye now.
Yeah.